Billionaire CEO fired his secretary. She returned as his new boss and made him beg. The moment Andrew Huffman saw her walk into that boardroom, every wall he'd built around his heart shattered. 5 years since he destroyed the only woman who'd ever made him feel truly alive. And now, Kimberly Lamar stood before him, not as his secretary, not as the broken woman he'd fired, but as the CEO who owned his company's fate. She moved with predatory grace in her midnight blue power suit, her hair swept back in a style that screamed success. Gone was the eager young woman who'd brought him coffee and stayed late to perfect his presentations. This woman commanded attention from every person in the room, and Andrew felt his pulse hammer against his throat as her dark eyes swept the conference table before settling on his face. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made his chest tighten, "let's discuss the acquisition of Huffman Industries." Acquisition. Not merger, not partnership. She was here to devour what remained of his empire, and the predatory smile that curved her lips told him she intended to savor every moment. Andrew's hands gripped the leather arms of his chair as memories crashed over him, the taste of her lips during their last kiss, the way she'd whispered his name in the darkness of his office, the trust in her eyes before he'd shattered it completely. He'd thought he could forget her. He'd spent 5 years trying to burn her out of his system, but sitting here now, watching her move like a queen among pawns, he realized he'd been lying to himself. She was magnificent, and she was here to destroy him. "Mr. Huffman," Kimberly said, her gaze locking with his across the polished mahogany table, "I trust you've reviewed our proposal?" The way she said his name, formal, distant, hit him like a physical blow. There was no warmth in those eyes that had once looked at him like he'd hung the stars. Only cool calculation and something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. "I've seen it," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. Around the table, his remaining board members shifted uncomfortably. They all knew what this meeting meant. Lamar Industries had grown into a tech giant that rivaled what Huffman Industries had been at its peak. Her company was thriving while his was bleeding money, clients, and credibility. She'd built an empire from the ashes of what he'd done to her. And now, she was here to claim her prize. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. "Excellent," Kimberly said, opening her leather portfolio with movements that were both elegant and lethal. "Then you understand that this acquisition represents your only viable path forward." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Andrew watched as she spread documents across the table. Every movement was calculated, every gesture designed to remind him of exactly how far their positions had reversed. "Your company is hemorrhaging resources," she continued, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd done her homework. "Client retention is down 67%. Your stock price has dropped 83% in 18 months. 3 of your major contracts were terminated last quarter alone." Each statistic felt like a knife between his ribs. She wasn't just reciting numbers. She was performing an autopsy on everything he'd built, and doing it with the thorough efficiency that had once made her an exceptional secretary. "We're prepared to offer you a position as senior consultant," she said, sliding a contract across the table toward him. "Naturally, you'd report directly to me." The silence in the room was deafening. Andrew stared at the papers without seeing them, his mind reeling. Report to her. The woman he'd fired. The woman he'd loved and lost and never stopped wanting. The irony would have been poetic if it weren't so devastating. "That's quite generous," he said finally, surprised by how steady his voice sounded when everything inside him was chaos. "I believe in recognizing talent," she replied, and for just a moment her mask slipped. Pain flashed across her features so quickly he might have imagined it, even when it comes wrapped in poor judgment. Their eyes met again, and the air between them crackled with 5 years of unresolved electricity. He saw her chest rise and fall a little faster, saw her fingers tighten almost imperceptibly on her pen. She felt it too, this magnetic pull that had always existed between them, this dangerous chemistry that had complicated everything from the very beginning. "Perhaps we could discuss the details privately," Andrew said, his voice dropping to that low register that had once made her blush. "I don't think that's necessary," she said quickly, but her eyes betrayed her. Heat flickered there for just an instant before she shuddered it away. "The terms are quite straightforward." But nothing between them had ever been straightforward. Even now, with her holding all the cards and him sitting in the ruins of his empire, the tension between them was so thick it was almost visible. He could see it in the way she avoided his direct gaze, in the distance she maintained between them, in the slightly unsteady rhythm of her breathing. 5 years, he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. "You've done well for yourself." Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "I had excellent motivation." The accusation hit its mark. He'd given her that motivation the day he'd fired her, the day he'd watched her world crumble and done nothing to stop it. He'd told himself it was necessary. He'd convinced himself it was for her own good. But sitting here now, seeing what she'd accomplished despite him, or perhaps because of him, he wondered if he'd been a fool. "Kimberly." "Ms. Lamar," she corrected sharply. "We're conducting business here, Mr. Huffman." The formal address stung, but he deserved it. He'd forfeited the right to her first name the day he'd destroyed her trust. Still, hearing it felt like losing her all over again. "Ms. Lamar," he said carefully, "this is quite an impressive operation you've built." "Thank you. I learned from the best." Her smile was sharp. "I learned exactly what not to do." The barb found its target, but Andrew found himself almost admiring her precision. This was what she'd become, a woman who could deliver devastating blows accurately. She'd taken the pain he'd caused her and forged it into strength, and despite everything, he was proud of her. "The board will need time to review," one of his directors began, but Kimberly cut him off with a raised hand. "You have 48 hours, she said, her attention never leaving Andrew's face. "After that, the offer expires, and Huffman Industries will face bankruptcy proceedings." She began gathering her documents with the same clinical efficiency she'd displayed throughout the meeting. Andrew watched her movements, remembering other times he'd watched her hands work, typing his letters, organizing his files, tracing patterns on his chest in the quiet aftermath of their stolen moments together. 48 hours seems rather aggressive," Andrew said, standing as she prepared to leave. The movement brought him closer to her, close enough to catch the subtle scent of her perfume. Different now, more expensive, but it still made his blood sing. "I find that tight deadlines encourage decisive action," she replied, but he noticed she took a small step back, maintaining the distance between them. "And if I refuse?" She tilted her head, studying him with those dark eyes that had once looked at him with such trust. "Then you'll lose everything. Your company, your reputation, your legacy." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "But then, you're quite good at throwing away valuable things, aren't you?" The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. She was talking about more than his company, and they both knew it. She was talking about what they'd had together, what he'd destroyed with his own hands. 48 hours, she repeated, louder now, addressing the room. "I expect your decision by Friday at 5 p.m. She moved toward the door with that same predatory grace, but Andrew couldn't let her leave. Not like this. Not again. "Kim! Ms. Lamar!" he called out, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't name. She paused at the threshold, her hand on the door handle, but she didn't turn around. "Was this always the plan?" he asked. "Building your company just to destroy mine?" For a long moment she stood frozen in the doorway. When she finally looked back at him, he saw something raw and vulnerable flicker across her face before she masked it. "No," she said quietly. "I built my company to prove I didn't need yours." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like finality. Andrew stood alone in the boardroom, surrounded by the remnants of his board and the wreckage of his pride, and realized that seeing her again had changed everything. 5 years ago, He'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Now she was back, and she held his future in her hands. The question was, would she choose mercy or justice? Looking at the contract she'd left behind, Andrew suspected he already knew the answer. The woman who'd just walked out of his boardroom wasn't the secretary he'd once loved. She was something far more dangerous. She was his reckoning. And God help him, even knowing she was here to destroy him, he still wanted her with a desperation that bordered on madness. Some hungers, he realized, could survive anything, even betrayal. The game had begun, and this time, he wasn't the one making the rules. But as he stood there breathing in the lingering traces of her presence, Andrew made himself a promise. He might have lost the first round, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Not when the stakes included the only woman who'd ever made him believe in something beyond power and profit. Not when the stakes included Kimberly. Chapter 2. The boardroom fell silent after Kimberly's departure, but the echo of her presence lingered like smoke. Andrew's board members shifted uncomfortably, their faces reflecting the gravity of what had just transpired. 48 hours to surrender everything he'd built, or watch it burn. "Andrew," said Richard Coleman, his longest-serving board member, "we need to discuss this seriously. The Lamar offer might be our only—" "Get out." Andrew's voice was quiet, deadly. "All of you, leave me alone." The men exchanged glances but wisely chose not to argue. They filed out in uncomfortable silence, leaving Andrew standing at the head of the empty conference table, staring at the contract that would sign away his life's work. But all he could think about was the way Kimberly's eyes had flashed when she'd looked at him. 5 years and she still made his blood burn. 5 years earlier. Kimberly Lamar had been 27 when she'd walked into Huffman Industries for her interview, nervous and determined in equal measure. She'd worn her best suit, navy blue from a discount store, and carried a portfolio filled with references that praised her efficiency, her dedication, her remarkable ability to anticipate needs before they were voiced. What those references hadn't mentioned was how her smile could light up a room, or how her laugh could make even the most mundane Tuesday feel like a celebration. They hadn't captured the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, or how her eyes sparkled when she was excited about a project. Andrew had hired her on the spot. "Mr. Huffman," she'd said during that first interview, her voice steady despite the nervous energy radiating from her small frame. "I don't just want to work for you. I want to help you build something extraordinary." She'd kept that promise in ways he'd never expected. Within months, she'd revolutionized his office systems, streamlined his schedule, and somehow managed to make his chaotic life feel manageable. But more than that, she'd brought warmth to a place that had always been cold corporate efficiency. She'd remembered his coffee preferences, kept fresh flowers on her desk that filled the outer office with subtle fragrance, and somehow intuited when he needed space, and when he needed someone to simply be present. She'd worked late without complaint, traveled with him to conferences, and slowly, inevitably, become indispensable. The attraction had been immediate and mutual, though both had fought it with determination. She was his secretary. He was her boss. There were rules, boundaries, expectations of propriety. But rules had a way of crumbling under the weight of genuine connection. It had started with lingering glances across the office, moments when their hands brushed while passing documents, conversations that went deeper than they should have. Late nights in the office had become charged with tension, neither acknowledged, but both felt. The first time he'd kissed her, it had been in his office at midnight on a Friday. She'd been organizing files for a Monday morning presentation, her hair falling loose from its pins, exhaustion making her movements softer, more vulnerable. "You should go home," he'd said, but he'd moved closer instead of stepping away. "So should you," she'd whispered, but she hadn't moved. The kiss had been inevitable, electric, world-changing. When they'd finally broken apart, both breathless and shaking, he'd seen his own amazement reflected in her eyes. "This is dangerous," she'd whispered against his lips. "I know," he'd replied, kissing her again anyway. What had followed was 6 months of stolen moments, secret touches, and a connection deeper than anything Andrew had ever experienced. She'd seen past his corporate armor to the man underneath, had challenged him, supported him, made him want to be better than he was. In quiet moments between meetings, she'd trace patterns on his hand while reviewing his schedule. During late nights in his office, she'd massage the tension from his shoulders while they worked. She'd laugh at his dry observations, call him out when his ego got too large, and somehow make him feel like the man he'd always wanted to be instead of just the CEO he'd become. "You're different when it's just us," she'd told him one evening as they'd worked past midnight on a crucial presentation. "Softer, more real." "You bring out sides of me I'd forgotten existed," he'd admitted, pulling her closer on the leather couch in his office. They'd made love for the first time on that couch, surrounded by quarterly reports and strategic plans, and it had been the most profound experience of his life. Not just the physical connection, though that had been incredible, but the emotional intimacy of being truly seen and accepted by someone who knew both his strengths and his flaws. But their secret hadn't remained secret long enough. Joe Manning, Andrew's business partner and supposed friend, had discovered their relationship during a late-night visit to the office. He'd walked in to find them in Andrew's arms, her blouse unbuttoned, his tie long discarded. "Well, well," Joe had said, his voice carrying a satisfaction that should have been a warning. "This is interesting." The threats had started the next week. Photos of Kimberly leaving Andrew's apartment, records of her salary increases, implications about her special duties and the nature of her employment. "She's a liability," Joe had said during what Andrew now realized was an orchestrated conversation. "The board won't stand for this kind of scandal. If this gets out, it'll destroy your reputation and tank our stock price." But it hadn't been about reputation or stock prices. It had been about control, about Joe positioning himself to take over the company while Andrew was distracted by love. The final threat had been the most effective. "If you don't end this, I'll make sure she's destroyed. No one will hire her. Her family's small business will suddenly face insurmountable regulatory problems. She'll lose everything, Andrew. Is your little romance worth ruining her life?" So Andrew had made the hardest decision of his life. He'd called Kimberly into his office on a Monday morning, his heart breaking with every word he forced himself to say. "This isn't working out," he'd told her, not meeting her eyes. "I'm terminating your employment effective immediately." The confusion on her face had nearly shattered his resolve. "I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Is this about—" "It's about maintaining clear working boundaries," he'd lied, each word tasting like poison. "What happened between us was a mistake. It can't continue." He'd watched her face crumble, watched the trust and love in her eyes transform into hurt and humiliation. She'd stood there for a long moment, waiting for him to take it back, to explain, to fight for what they had had. But he'd remained silent, letting her believe the worst of him rather than putting her in danger. "I see," she'd said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll clear out my desk." Those had been the last words she'd spoken to him before today. She'd packed her belongings in cardboard boxes while he'd hidden in his office like a coward, listening to her quiet movements and hating himself with every breath. Security footage later showed her sitting in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes after leaving, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. That image had haunted his dreams for 5 years. Present day. Andrew poured himself 3 fingers of scotch from the bar in his office and settled into his chair, staring out at the Seattle skyline. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd thought he was protecting her by pushing her away, but instead he'd created his own destruction. Because Kimberly hadn't just survived his betrayal, she'd transformed it into fuel. After leaving Huffman Industries, she'd disappeared completely. Her apartment had been vacated, her phone disconnected, her social media accounts deleted. Andrew had tried to find her, had hired private investigators, called in favors, spent sleepless nights wondering if she was safe, if she was okay, if she hated him as much as he hated himself. The investigators had found nothing. It was as if Kimberly Lamar had simply ceased to exist. What he hadn't known was that she'd legally changed her name to Kimberly Lamar, moved across the country, and used her severance package and savings to start a small consulting firm focused on business efficiency and strategic planning. The skills she'd developed working for him, anticipating needs, streamlining processes, understanding the intricate workings of corporate machinery, had made her invaluable to struggling companies. Within 18 months, Lamar Consulting had grown from a one-woman operation to a team of 12. Within 3 years, she'd expanded into software development, creating programs that revolutionized how businesses managed their operations. By year 4, she'd acquired 2 smaller companies and established Lamar Industries as a major player in the tech sector. Her sister Kathy had joined the company as head of legal counsel, bringing her law degree and fierce protective instincts to bear on Kimberly's behalf. Together, they'd built something remarkable, a company that competed directly with the industry giants, including Huffman Industries. But Andrew suspected it hadn't been about competition. It had been about proving something, to herself, to the world, to him. She'd succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. The cruel irony was that while Kimberly had been building her empire, his had begun to crumble. Joe Manning's betrayal had been subtle but devastating. Client contracts mysteriously canceled, key employees poached by competitors, strategic information leaked at crucial moments. By the time Andrew realized what was happening, Joe had positioned himself to step in as the company's savior. The divorce from Helena had been the final blow. She'd taken half of everything in a vicious legal battle that had made headlines and damaged his reputation beyond repair. "He's not the man I married," she'd told reporters. "Success changed him, made him cold." What she hadn't said, what she couldn't have known, was that losing Kimberly had changed him. The man Helena had married had been capable of love, of vulnerability, of connection. The man she'd divorced was a hollow shell who'd traded his heart for what he'd thought was protection. Now his company was bleeding money, his reputation was in tatters, and the woman he'd never stopped loving was offering to buy the wreckage of his life. I want to know, have you ever had to face someone from your past who changed everything? Someone who made you question who you'd become? Share your story in the comments below. Your courage might inspire someone else going through their own transformation. Andrew's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Ms. Lamar's team has requested a follow-up meeting for Thursday. Should I confirm?" He stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Seeing her again would be torture. She was everything he'd lost, everything he'd thrown away, everything he still wanted with a desperation that bordered on obsession. But he had to try. He had to see if there was any chance, however small, that beneath her polished exterior, some part of the woman who'd once loved him still existed. "Confirm it," he typed back. 2 days to figure out how to save his company. 2 days to find the courage to face the woman whose heart he'd broken. 2 days to somehow convince her that the man who'd destroyed her trust was worth a second chance. As he sat in his empty office, surrounded by the monuments to his success and the evidence of his failures, Andrew realized something that should have terrified him, but instead filled him with something dangerously close to hope. Losing everything meant he had nothing left to protect, nothing left to fear, nothing left to hide behind. Maybe for the first time in 5 years he could finally tell her the truth. The question was whether she'd listen, or if she'd already made up her mind to watch him burn. Chapter 3. Thursday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Andrew had spent 2 sleepless nights preparing for this meeting, though no amount of preparation could ready him for seeing Kimberly again. He'd rehearsed conversations, practiced explanations, searched for words that might bridge the chasm between them. But when she walked into his office at precisely 2 o'clock, every planned speech evaporated from his mind. She wore black today, a power suit that hugged her curves and made her look untouchable. Her hair was pulled back in a severe chignon that emphasized the elegant line of her neck, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who owned every room she entered. "Mr. Huffman," she said, "thank you for agreeing to meet." "Kim," he caught himself, "Ms. Lamar, please, sit." She chose the chair across from his desk, rather than the more intimate seating area near the windows. The message was clear. This was business, Nothing more. I assume you've had time to consider our proposal, she said, crossing her legs and placing a slim folder on her lap. Andrew found himself distracted by the simple movement, memory flooding back of other times he'd watched her settle into a chair. Times when she'd worn softer clothes, when her smile had been for him alone, when the space between them had hummed with anticipation rather than hostility. I've considered it, he said. I have some questions. I'm sure you do. Her dark eyes met his directly, unflinching. Ask them. The directness was new. The Kimberly he'd known had been more diplomatic, gentler in her approach. This version was harder, sharper, forged in fire and tempered by betrayal. Why this offer? He asked. Why not just let me fail? Something flickered across her features, too quick to identify. Because failure serves no one. Your technology patents alone are worth the acquisition price. Your client database, despite recent losses, still has value. From a business perspective, this makes sense. That's not what I'm asking, and you know it. She tilted her head, studying him with those intelligent eyes that had always seen too much. What are you asking, Mr. Huffman? Why you? Why are you here personally instead of sending representatives? Why does Kimberly Lamar care what happens to Andrew Huffman? The question hung between them like a challenge. For a moment her mask slipped, and he caught a glimpse of something raw underneath. Hurt, anger, and something else he couldn't quite name. You think rather highly of yourself, she said finally. This is business, nothing more. Is it? He leaned forward, drawn by the crack in her armor. Because I remember a time when business was the last thing on our minds. That was a long time ago. Her voice sharp. People change. Yes, he said quietly. They do. You certainly have. She stood abruptly, moving to the windows that overlooked the city. From here you could see the Lamar Industries building, sleek, modern, successful. A monument to everything she'd built from the ashes of what he'd destroyed. You want to know why I'm here? She said without turning around. Because 5 years ago, you taught me that depending on others is a luxury I couldn't afford. You showed me that trust is a weakness that gets exploited. So I built something that couldn't be taken away, something that couldn't be destroyed by someone else's decision. Her reflection in the window was ghost-like, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the rigid line of her spine. And now, he asked, now I own everything you used to have. Your clients work with me. Your employees have come to me. Your reputation. She turned back to face him, and her smile was razor-sharp. Well, that speaks for itself. The words should have hurt. They were designed to hurt. But instead, Andrew found himself filled with something uncomfortably close to pride. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into strength. She'd become magnificent. So this is revenge, he said. This is justice. What's the difference? She moved closer to his desk, her eyes flashing with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. Revenge would be watching you lose everything and walking away. Justice is giving you a chance to be part of something bigger than your own ego. Under your control. Under my leadership. She placed her hands on his desk, leaning forward slightly. The movement brought her closer, close enough that he could catch the subtle scent of her perfume, something expensive and sophisticated that was nothing like the soft floral fragrance she'd worn before. There's a difference. And if I refuse, then you'll discover exactly how far I'm willing to go to protect what I've built. The threat was delivered calmly, but Andrew heard the steel underneath. This wasn't the woman who'd once traced patterns on his hand while they worked late into the night. This was someone who'd been forged in fire and emerged harder, stronger, more dangerous. You've changed, he said. I had to. She straightened but didn't step back. The woman you knew was naive. She believed in things like loyalty and trust and happily ever after. That woman was weak. That woman was beautiful. The words escaped before he could stop them, raw and honest and completely inappropriate for the situation. Kimberly's eyes widened slightly, and for just a moment he saw vulnerability flicker across her features. That woman is dead, she said quietly. Is she? He stood, moving around the desk until only a few feet separated them. Because standing here now, looking at you, I see her. Different, stronger, but still her. You see what you want to see. I see a woman who's built an empire but still bites her lower lip when she's nervous. He gestured toward her mouth, where her teeth had indeed caught her lip. I see someone who stands by windows when she's thinking, just like she used to. I see— Stop! Her voice was sharp, desperate. Just stop! But he couldn't stop. Being this close to her after 5 years of emptiness was like being offered water in a desert. Every instinct screamed at him to reach for her, to close the distance between them, to see if the fire that had once burned between them was truly extinguished. I see the woman I never stopped. Don't, she held up a hand, backing away. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Why? Because it might be true? Because you might have spent the last 5 years trying to convince yourself you hate me, but standing here now, you feel it too. Feel what? But her voice was breathless now, and her eyes had darkened in a way that had nothing to do with anger. This, he gestured between them, at the electric tension that seemed to pulse in the air. The same thing that made us both forget every rule, every boundary, every reason why we shouldn't. That was before you destroyed everything. Yes, it was. Before I made the biggest mistake of my life. Before I let fear make my decisions for me. Before I chose what I thought was protecting you over fighting for us. She stared at him, and he saw the exact moment his words registered. Protecting me. Andrew realized he'd said too much, revealed more than he'd intended. But maybe it was time for the truth. Maybe losing everything meant he finally had nothing left to lose. There are things you don't know, he said quietly. Things I couldn't tell you then. Such as? He opened his mouth to explain, but his office door burst open without warning. Joe Manning strode in, his face flushed with anger, and something that looked like panic. Andrew, we need to talk, now. Joe's eyes fell on Kimberly, and his expression shifted to something calculating. Ms. Lamar, how interesting to find you here. The moment was shattered, and Kimberly's professional mask slammed back into place, and she stepped away from Andrew as if he'd burned her. Mr. Manning, she said coolly, I was just leaving. Were you? Joe's smile was predatory. I hope Andrew hasn't been filling your head with stories. You know how he can be. Charming when it suits his purposes. Andrew saw Kimberly's jaw tighten, saw the way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. But when she spoke, her voice was perfectly controlled. Mr. Huffman and I were discussing business terms, nothing more. She gathered her purse and folder with sharp, efficient movements. The offer stands until 5 p.m. tomorrow, Mr. Huffman. I suggest you choose wisely. She moved toward the door, but paused next to Joe. Mr. Manning, always a pleasure. The words were polite, but the look she gave him could have frozen fire. Then she was gone, leaving Andrew alone with the man who'd orchestrated the destruction of everything he'd cared about. You need to stay away from her, Joe said the moment the door closed. She's dangerous. More dangerous than you? Andrew's voice was deadly quiet. Joe's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you think you know. I know enough. Andrew moved closer, letting every ounce of his fury show. I know you've been systematically destroying this company for months. I know you've been feeding information to our competitors. I know you're the reason I'm sitting here with a 48-hour ultimatum instead of a thriving business. You're paranoid. The stress is getting to you. Am I? Then you won't mind if I have our books audited by an independent firm. You won't mind if I review all the contracts you've negotiated in the past year. You won't mind if I— You'll what? Joe's facade cracked, revealing the venom underneath. You're finished, Andrew. Your company is done, your reputation is ruined, and your precious Kimberly is about to carve up what's left like a Thanksgiving turkey. Face reality. The only reality I'm facing is that I trusted the wrong person. Again, Joe's laugh was harsh. Trust? You want to talk about trust? You were so busy playing house with your secretary that you let me do all the real work. You handed me everything I needed to take this place apart, piece by piece. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Andrew felt everything click into place. The missing contracts, the leaked information, the systematic destruction of everything he'd built. "Why?" he asked. "Because I deserved it more than you did. I worked twice as hard for half the credit. I built the relationships while you chased after some naive little girl who believed your lies about caring." The mention of Kimberly sent rage flooding through Andrew's system. She was never naive, and I never lied to her. "Didn't you? Then why isn't she here as your partner instead of your destroyer? If you cared so much, why did you throw her away like garbage?" "Because I was trying to protect her from you," Andrew thought. "Because I was an idiot who thought he could control the situation. Because I made the worst decision of my life, and I've been paying for it every day since." But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he walked to his desk and picked up his phone. "Security," he said when the call connected. "I need an escort for Mr. Manning. He's no longer welcome in this building." Joe's face flushed red. "You can't." "I can, and I am. You're fired, Joe. And if I find out you've taken anything that belongs to this company, I'll have you arrested. This isn't over." "Yes," Andrew said quietly. "It is." Security arrived within minutes, and Andrew watched with grim satisfaction as Joe was escorted from the building. Only when he was alone did he allow himself to slump into his chair, the full weight of the last hour crashing over him. Kimberly had been here, in his office, close enough to touch. And for just a moment, he'd seen past her armor to the woman underneath, hurt, angry, but still her, still the woman who'd made him believe in something beyond profit and power. But Joe's interruption had reminded him of brutal realities. Even if there was still something between them, even if she felt the same pull he did, there were forces working against them, enemies who would use any connection between them as a weapon. Just like before. The parallels were too clear to ignore. Once again, loving Kimberly put her in danger. Once again, he had to choose between his heart and her safety. But this time, she wasn't the vulnerable secretary who needed his protection. This time, she was the one with power, the one making the decisions. The question was, would she choose mercy, or would she choose to watch him burn? As Andrew sat in his empty office, staring at the contract that would sign away his life's work, he realized something that should have terrified him, but instead filled him with desperate hope. He was going to sign it. He was going to give her everything, put himself completely at her mercy, and trust that somewhere underneath her armor, the woman who'd once loved him still existed. It was either the bravest thing he'd ever done, or the most foolish. With Kimberly Lamar, he'd never been able to tell the difference. Chapter 4. 24 hours remained. Andrew sat in his penthouse at midnight, a glass of aged scotch untouched on the table beside him, staring at the contract that would change everything. The acquisition papers were spread across his coffee table like autopsy reports, each page documenting the systematic dissection of his life's work. He should sign them. Logic demanded it. Pride be damned. Kimberly's offer was generous, more than generous. She could have let him drown, could have picked up the pieces for pennies on the dollar after bankruptcy proceedings destroyed what remained of his reputation. Instead, she'd offered him a lifeline wrapped in dignity. The question that kept him awake wasn't whether to sign. It was why she'd made the offer at all. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Building security. Ms. Lamar is here requesting access to your office. Should I allow entry?" Andrew's pulse spiked. 11:47 p.m., and Kimberly was at his building. The same building she now technically owned through a complex web of shell companies and strategic investments, something he'd only discovered that afternoon when his lawyers had finally untangled the financial web surrounding Huffman Industries. She'd been circling him for months, buying up his debt, acquiring strategic partnerships with his suppliers, positioning herself to own his company before she'd ever walked into that boardroom. The acquisition meeting had been theater. She'd already won. "Send her up," he texted back. Andrew moved to the windows of his corner office, watching the city lights blur into abstract patterns 40 floors below. Seattle had been their city once. They'd walked these streets together, discovered hole-in-the-wall restaurants, spent Sunday mornings at Pike Place Market buying flowers she'd arrange on her desk. Now the city felt like a stranger, and the woman who'd once known every corner of his heart was about to walk through his door as his conqueror. The elevator chimed softly, and he heard the distinctive click of her heels on marble. She moved differently now, purpose in every step, confidence radiating from her posture. The uncertain young woman who'd once knocked hesitantly on his door was gone, replaced by someone who owned every room she entered. Working late? Her voice carried a note of irony as she appeared in his doorway. She'd changed since the afternoon meeting. Gone was the severe business suit, replaced by dark jeans that hugged her curves and a cream-colored sweater that made her skin glow. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and for a moment she looked like the woman he remembered. "Old habits," he said, not turning from the window, "though I suppose I won't need to worry about that much longer." Having second thoughts about the contract? No. He faced her then, taking in the way the city lights played across her features. Having first thoughts about why you're really here. She moved further into the office, her eyes scanning the familiar space. Nothing had changed since she'd left 5 years ago. Same leather furniture, same abstract paintings, same view that had once taken her breath away during their first late-night working session. "Nostalgia," she said finally. "I wanted to see it one more time before everything changes." "That's not why you're here," she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You always did think you could read my mind." "I could. Once." He moved closer, drawn by some magnetic force he'd never learned to resist. "You'd get this little crease between your eyebrows when you were thinking too hard. You'd tap your pen against your lip when you were nervous. You'd—" "Stop!" The word was sharp, desperate. "I'm not that person anymore." "Aren't you?" He gestured toward her mouth, where she'd been unconsciously biting her lower lip. "Some things don't change, Kim." "Don't call me that." "Why? Because it reminds you of who you used to be? Or because it reminds you of us?" She turned away, moving to the bookshelf where she'd once organized his references, arranged his awards, made his cold office feel like home. Her fingers traced the spine of a leather-bound volume of business law, the same book she'd studied during lunch breaks, determined to understand every aspect of his world. "There is no us," she said quietly. "There hasn't been for 5 years." "Then why are you here? At midnight, in an empty building, when you could have sent the contract through lawyers? Why come yourself?" She was quiet for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I needed to see you sign it. I needed to watch you give up everything, the way you made me give up everything." The honesty hit him like a physical blow. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He had made her give up everything, her job, her trust, her belief in their future together. "You think this is about revenge," he said. "Isn't it? Maybe it started that way. But standing here now, watching you try so hard to pretend you feel nothing." He moved closer, close enough to see the rapid pulse at her throat, close enough to catch the subtle scent that was uniquely hers. "I think you're here because you need closure as much as I do." "I have closure. I have everything I could ever want." "Do you?" The question was soft, but it hit its mark. He saw her flinch, saw her hands clench into fists at her sides. "Because the woman I knew wanted more than just success. She wanted connection. She wanted love. She wanted things that don't exist." Kimberly spun to face him, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She wanted fairy tales and happy endings, and men who fought for what they claimed to love instead of throwing it away the moment things got difficult. "Is that what you think I did? Threw you away because things got difficult?" "I know that's what you did. I was there, remember? I was the one standing in your office while you told me I was a mistake. I was the one who packed my things while you hid behind your desk like a coward." Each word was a knife between his ribs, but he deserved every cut. He'd hurt her in ways he was only beginning to understand, had damaged something precious and irreplaceable because he'd been too afraid to fight for it. "You're right," he said simply. The admission seemed to deflate her anger. She'd been prepared for arguments, for excuses, for him to minimize what he'd done. She hadn't been prepared for complete capitulation. I was a coward, he continued. I did hide. I did throw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too scared to fight for it. Then why? She stopped herself, but he could see the question in her eyes. Why am I telling you this now? Because I have nothing left to lose. Because sitting here, watching my company die, I realize that losing everything else is nothing compared to losing you. And because you deserve the truth, even if it's 5 years too late. She stared at him, and he could see her struggling, her composure warring with emotional vulnerability, anger fighting with something that looked dangerously like hope. The truth, she repeated. The truth is that firing you was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The truth is that I spent months looking for you, hiring investigators, calling in every favor I had. The truth is that there hasn't been a single day in 5 years when I haven't regretted that decision. But you did it anyway. Yes. Why? This was the moment, the crossroads where he could tell her everything or let her continue believing the lie, where he could give her the closure she needed or selfishly hope for something more. Andrew thought of Joe Manning's threats, of the photos and the promises of destruction. He thought of Jeff Page and the other vultures who'd been circling even then, waiting for any sign of weakness. He thought of all the reasons he'd convinced himself that protecting her was worth destroying them both. But looking at her now, successful, strong, magnificent in her anger, he realized she'd never needed his protection. She'd needed his trust, his faith in her strength, his willingness to fight beside her instead of for her. Because I was threatened, he said finally. Because Joe Manning had photos of us together, and he promised to destroy you if I didn't end it. Because I thought I was protecting you, and I was too much of an arrogant fool to realize I was actually betraying you. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Kimberly's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with shock. Threatened how? Pictures of you leaving my apartment, documentation of your salary increases, implications about the nature of your employment. Andrew's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. He said he'd make sure you never worked in this industry again. Said your family's business would face regulatory problems that would destroy them. Said you'd lose everything because of your association with me. So you made the choice for me. Yes. You decided I was too weak to handle the truth. I decided I couldn't live with myself if loving me destroyed your life. She was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the full weight of his confession. When she finally spoke, her voice was deadly calm. Do you have any idea what you took from me? Everything. I took everything from you. No. She moved closer, and he could see fury blazing in her dark eyes. You took my choice. You took my agency. You took my right to decide what risks I was willing to take for love. Each word hit him like a physical blow, and he realized she was right. In trying to protect her, he'd infantilized her, had treated her like someone who needed to be shielded from difficult decisions instead of someone strong enough to make them. You're right, he said. I could have handled Joe Manning. I could have handled the threats, the photos, the implications. What I couldn't handle was the man I loved looking me in the eye and telling me I was a mistake. Kim, I mourned us, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. I mourned what we had, what we could have been. I built my entire life around proving I was worth more than how you treated me. And now you're telling me it was all a lie? Not all of it. What we had was real. What I felt for you, feel for you, was real. Was it? Because the man I loved would have trusted me with the truth, would have fought for us instead of making executive decisions about our relationship. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, and Andrew felt his own control cracking. This was worse than her anger, worse than her hatred. This was her grief, raw and devastating for what they'd lost. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so fucking sorry, Kim. I would give anything to go back, to handle it differently, to trust you the way you deserve to be trusted. But you can't. I can't. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and when she looked at him again, something had shifted. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Exhaustion, maybe, or resignation. 5 years, she said. 5 years of my life built on a lie. Not a lie. Never a lie. I loved you. I still love you. That was never false. The admission hung between them like a confession. He saw her breath catch, saw her eyes widen with something that might have been hope or might have been pain. Don't, she whispered. Don't what? Don't tell you the truth. Don't admit that losing you destroyed me more completely than losing my company ever could. Don't say that seeing you again made me realize I've been dead for 5 years. Don't make this harder than it already is. Why? Because you feel it too. Because standing here, you remember what we had. Because part of you still. Because it doesn't matter. The words erupted from her with explosive force. It doesn't matter what I feel or what you feel or what we had. You made your choice 5 years ago and I made mine. I chose to survive. I chose to build something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's fear. And I chose to let you go because I was too much of a coward to fight for us. They stood facing each other in the middle of his office, 5 feet apart but separated by years of hurt and decisions that couldn't be undone. The air between them crackled with tension, sexual, emotional, devastating. Sign the contract, Kimberly said finally. Is that what you want? It's what has to happen. That's not what I asked. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, he saw his own heartbreak reflected there. What I want doesn't matter anymore, she said quietly. What I want is 5 years too late. But even as she said it, she moved closer. Close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin, close enough to remember exactly why he'd risked everything to be with her in the first place. Kim, he breathed, don't. But she didn't move away. Instead, she raised one trembling hand to his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a gentleness that broke his heart. I hate you, she whispered. I know. I hate that you still make my heart race. I hate that seeing you again makes me remember how it felt to be loved by you. I hate that after everything you did, part of me still... He caught her hand in his, pressing it flat against his chest where his heart was beating so hard he was sure she could feel it. Still what? Still loves you. The admission was barely audible, but it hit him with the force of an earthquake. Everything he'd hoped for, everything he'd dreamed of during 5 years of empty nights, was standing right in front of him. Kim, no. She pulled her hand away and stepped back. No, this isn't happening. This is exactly what I came here to avoid. What if it doesn't have to be avoided? What if we could... What? Try again? Pretend the last 5 years didn't happen? Pretend you didn't break my heart so completely I had to become someone else just to survive? I don't know, but maybe we could figure it out together. She laughed cynically. Together, like we were supposed to be 5 years ago, like you promised we would be right before you threw me away. I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life, but we could what, Andrew? We could try again, and when the next crisis comes, when the next threat appears, you could make another executive decision about my life. You could decide what's best for me without bothering to ask what I want. The words were a gut punch because they were true. He had done exactly that. Had treated her like someone who needed to be managed rather than someone who deserved to be trusted. I wouldn't, he said, but even he could hear how hollow it sounded. Wouldn't you? Because that's who you are. That's who you've always been. Someone who makes decisions for other people because you think you know better. That's not, isn't it? Even now you're trying to convince me to give you another chance instead of respecting my decision to walk away. Even now you think you know what's best for me. The observation hit him like a slap. She was right. Even in this moment, even knowing what his previous decisions had cost them, he was still trying to control the outcome instead of trusting her judgment. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. The simple acknowledgement seemed to deflate some of her anger. She'd been prepared for arguments, for him to defend his actions or minimize her concerns. She hadn't expected complete capitulation. I am, she said, and for just a moment she sounded like the uncertain young woman he remembered. Yes, you deserve better than someone who makes decisions about your life without trusting you enough to include you. You deserved better then. and you deserve better now." They stood in silence, the weight of lost possibilities hanging between them like fog. Outside, the city continued its midnight rhythm, oblivious to the heartbreak being dissected 40 floors above. "Sign the contract, Andrew," Kimberly said finally, her voice gentle now, almost kind. "Sign it, and let us both move on with our lives." He walked to the coffee table where the papers waited, picked up a pen, and stared at the signature line that would end everything he'd built. But as he prepared to sign away his company, he realized something that should have terrified him, but instead filled him with strange peace. Losing his business meant nothing compared to losing her, and he'd lost her 5 years ago through his own cowardice and arrogance. At least this time, he was losing her honestly. "Kim," he said without looking up from the contract. "Yes?" "For what it's worth, you were never a mistake. What we had was never a mistake. The only mistake was letting you go." He signed his name with quick, decisive strokes, each letter sealing his fate. When he finished, he set the pen down and looked up to find her watching him with something that might have been regret. "There," he said, "it's done." She moved to the table, gathered the papers with efficient movements, but her hands were trembling slightly. "The transition will begin Monday," she said. "You'll report to Kevin Chesky initially, though we can discuss other arrangements once you've settled into your new role." "Kevin?" Andrew almost smiled. "I trained him well." "Yes, you did. He speaks very highly of you." The conversation felt surreal, polite, and completely divorced from the emotional devastation they'd just inflicted on each other. They were discussing business arrangements while their hearts lay in pieces between them. "I should go," Kimberly said, but she didn't move. "Should you?" "Yes, this is—" She gestured helplessly at the space between them. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." "What? Honesty?" "Confusion, hope, all the things that make it impossible to think clearly. Maybe thinking clearly is overrated," says the man who just signed away his company. Says the man who just realized that some things are more important than companies. She looked at him then, and he saw his own longing reflected in her eyes. The mask had slipped again, and underneath was the woman who'd once loved him enough to risk everything. "This doesn't change anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Doesn't it?" "Number, it doesn't. You hurt me, Andrew. You broke something in me that took years to heal. I can't just forget that because you finally decided to tell me the truth. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe we could find a way to heal together. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we could figure it out as we go." She was quiet for a long moment, conflict playing across her features. He could see her weighing possibilities, calculating risks, trying to decide whether the potential reward was worth the inevitable pain. "I need time," she said finally. "How much time?" "I don't know, maybe forever." The words should have crushed him, but instead, he felt something almost like relief. Time wasn't no. Time wasn't never. Time was a door left slightly ajar instead of slammed shut. "I'll wait," he said. Don't put your life on hold for something that might never happen." "My life has been on hold for 5 years. What's a little longer?" She moved toward the door, then paused at the threshold. "Andrew?" "Yeah? I'm glad you told me the truth. Even if it's too late, I'm glad I finally know." And then she was gone, leaving him, alone with the wreckage of his empire and the faint possibility that maybe, someday, he might find a way to earn back the only thing that had ever really mattered. The contract was signed. His company was hers. His future was in her hands. For the first time in 5 years, Andrew Huffman went to sleep with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Chapter 5. The next morning brought chaos. Andrew arrived at what was now technically Kimberly's building to find Kevin Chesky waiting in the lobby, his expression grim and his usual easy smile nowhere to be found. "We need to talk," Kevin said without preamble. "Privately." They rode the elevator to Andrew's office in tense silence. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed harsh, unforgiving, illuminating the empty spaces where his personal belongings had once made the room feel like home. The contract signing had been more than a business transaction. It had been an ending. "Coffee?" Andrew offered, moving to the machine that had been Kimberly's first improvement to his office years ago. "This isn't a social call." Kevin closed the door behind them and activated the white noise generator Andrew kept for sensitive conversations. "I have information you need to hear." "About the transition? I'm prepared to. About Joe Manning, about Jeff Page, about the systematic destruction of your company that's been orchestrated for the past 2 years. Andrew's hand stilled on the coffee machine. "Go on." Kevin pulled out a tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. "I've been digging since I joined Lamar Industries. Call it loyalty to my former boss. Call it curiosity. Whatever. The point is, I found things. Financial irregularities, communications, evidence of deliberate sabotage." He turned the screen toward Andrew, revealing a series of emails between Joe Manning and Jeff Page dating back 18 months. "They've been planning this takeover since before Kimberly even appeared on your radar as a competitor," Kevin continued. "Joe was feeding information to Page, who was using it to poach your clients and undercut your bids. But it gets worse." Andrew scanned the emails, his blood growing colder with each message. References to accelerating the timeline, mentions of neutralizing the Lamar threat, detailed discussions about market manipulation and client sabotage. They knew about Kim, about Kimberly, before the acquisition meeting, Andrew said, the pieces clicking into place. More than that, they've been monitoring her company for months, looking for weaknesses, trying to find ways to destroy her credibility. There are emails here about planted rumors, attempts to sabotage her contracts, even discussions about personal attacks on her character. Rage flooded Andrew's system like poison. Bad enough that Joe had destroyed his company, but the thought of these men targeting Kimberly, trying to tear down everything she'd built. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because they're not done. The emails stopped 3 days ago, but there are references to a final phase and something called Project Reset. I think they're planning something big, something that targets both you and Kimberly." Andrew's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Jeff Page's name appeared on the screen, and he felt his jaw clench with fury. "Speak of the devil," he muttered, showing Kevin the screen. "Answer it," Kevin said, quickly connecting a recording device to Andrew's phone. "Let's see what he wants." Andrew accepted the call and put it on speaker. "Page. Andrew, good to hear your voice. I trust you've had time to consider my proposal." "What proposal?" "The one I sent over this morning. Surely you've seen it by now. A very generous offer for the Huffman Industries client database and intellectual property. Much more generous than what Lamar Industries offered, I'm sure." Andrew hadn't seen any proposal, but he kept his voice neutral. "I'll need to review the details." Of course. Though I should mention, the offer has a very short window. These things move quickly in our industry, as you well know. Opportunities like this don't wait for indecision." The implied threat was clear. Accept Page's offer or face consequences. "I'll be in touch," Andrew said, ending the call. Kevin was already pulling up another screen on his tablet. "The proposal came through 30 minutes ago. He's offering to buy your client lists and patents for twice what Kimberly paid for the whole company." "Why would he need to buy them, if Kim owns the company?" "Because he wants to make sure she never gets them. Look at this." Kevin showed him another email chain, this one between Page and a team of lawyers. He's planning to challenge the acquisition on grounds of financial impropriety. Claims that Lamar Industries used predatory lending practices and manipulation to force the sale. Andrew felt sick. Can he do that? He can try. More importantly, he can tie the whole thing up in litigation for years, bankrupt both companies with legal fees while he swoops in to pick up the pieces. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. This wasn't just about destroying Andrew's company. It was about eliminating both him and Kimberly as competitors, leaving Page to dominate the market. "There's more," Kevin said quietly. "Personal stuff, about you and Kimberly." Andrew's blood went cold. "Show me." The emails were worse than he'd imagined. Photos from 5 years ago, him and Kimberly leaving his apartment, sharing dinner at a quiet restaurant, walking hand in hand through Pike Place Market. Images he'd thought were private moments, captured and cataloged like evidence in a case file. But worse were the recent photos. Kimberly entering his building the night before. The two of them visible through his office windows, standing close together, her hand on his face. "They've been watching both of you," Kevin said. "The photos from last night. Andrew, if these get out, they'll destroy Kimberly's reputation. The business community will assume she's using personal relationships to conduct acquisitions. It'll undermine everything she's built." Andrew stared at the images, fury and terror warring in his chest. History was repeating itself devastatingly. Once again, his connection to Kimberly was being weaponized against her. Once again, loving him put her in danger. "We have to warn her," he said. "Already tried. She's in meetings all morning and her assistant says she's not taking calls." Kevin's expression was grim. "But there's something else. The metadata on these photos shows they were taken with high-tech equipment, telephoto lenses, high-resolution cameras. This isn't amateur surveillance. They hired investigators. More than that, I think they hired the same team Joe used 5 years ago. The same people who originally threatened to destroy Kimberly's life if you didn't fire her." The revelation hit Andrew like a physical blow. The threats, the photos, the systematic destruction of everything he cared about. It was all connected, all part of a larger plan that had been years in the making. His phone rang again. This time, it was Kimberly. "Kim, we need to meet now." Her voice was sharp, urgent. "My office, there's something you need to see." Have you ever had to choose between what your head tells you and what your heart knows is right? Between revenge and forgiveness? I'd love to hear how you navigated that impossible choice. Share your wisdom in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. 30 minutes later, Andrew stood in Kimberly's corner office, surrounded by the visible proof of her success. Awards lined the walls. Photos of groundbreaking ceremonies and partnership signings created a timeline of achievement that began exactly 5 years and 1 month ago. She'd built something extraordinary from the ashes of what he'd destroyed, and now it was all at risk. "They sent this an hour ago," Kimberly said without preamble, sliding a manila envelope across her desk. Inside were printouts of the same photos Kevin had shown him, along with a letter that made Andrew's blood run cold. "Ms. Lamar," he read aloud, "your recent acquisition of Huffman Industries raises questions about your business practices and personal ethics. The enclosed photographs suggest that your relationship with Mr. Huffman may not be as objective as your public statements indicate. We believe the business community has a right to know when personal relationships influence major corporate decisions. Unless you withdraw from the Huffman acquisition and dissolve Lamar Industries' involvement with all former Huffman contracts, these images will be released to major business publications within 48 hours. Blackmail, Andrew said flatly. Effective blackmail. Kimberly moved to the windows, her shoulders rigid with tension. "If these photos get out, they'll destroy my credibility. Every deal I've ever made will be questioned. Competitors will claim I used personal relationships to gain unfair advantages. My clients will wonder what other special arrangements I might have." "You can't give in to this?" She turned to face him, and he saw the same trapped look in her eyes that he'd seen 5 years ago. "Can I? Everything I've built is at stake, Andrew. My company, my reputation, my employees' livelihoods. All of it will be destroyed if these photos become public." "So we fight back. We expose Page and Manning for what they are. With what evidence? Some emails that could have been fabricated, circumstantial connections that might not hold up in court." She laughed bitterly. "By the time we prove anything, the damage will be done. My reputation will be ruined, and Page will have exactly what he wanted." Andrew moved closer, desperate to offer comfort but unsure if his touch would be welcome. "Kim, you can't let them win. Not again." "Again?" Her eyes flashed with sudden understanding. "This is the same thing, isn't it? The same threats Joe made 5 years ago." "Yes. And you're asking me to make the same choice you made then. Risk everything for principle." The parallel was uncomfortable but undeniable. 5 years ago he'd chosen her safety over their relationship. Now she was being asked to choose her company over their connection. I'm asking you to trust that we can find another way. Trust. She said the word like it tasted bitter. You want me to trust you, after what happened the last time I trusted you with my future. This is different. Is it? Because it feels exactly the same. You asking me to risk everything while you... She stopped, her eyes widening. While you what, Andrew? What exactly are you risking here? The question caught him off guard. What was he risking? His company was already gone. His reputation was already ruined. What did he have left to lose? Everything, he said finally. My life without you. My future. Any chance at redemption. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. You're right. You're risking tangible things, your company, your employees, your legacy. I'm only risking my heart. The admission hung between them like a confession. Kimberly stared at him, and he could see her calculating the unfairness of it. She would lose everything concrete, while he would lose only the abstract possibility of their future together. I can't, she said quietly. I can't risk everything again. Not for you, not for anyone. Then don't, she blinked, clearly expecting an argument. What? Don't risk everything. Give them what they want. Dissolve the acquisition, walk away from the contracts, protect what you've built. You would ask me to do that? I would ask you to do whatever you need to do to protect yourself, even if it means protecting yourself from me. The words felt like swallowing glass shards, but they were true. He'd spent 5 years regretting his decision to choose her safety over their relationship. He wouldn't make the same mistake again by asking her to sacrifice her security for his redemption. That's not... You're supposed to fight for us. You're supposed to convince me that love is worth the risk. Is it? Is love worth losing everything you've worked for? Is the possibility of us worth destroying the certainty of what you've built? She stared at him, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I don't know. Then you have your answer. Do I? Andrew moved to the door, his heart breaking with every step. You do. And for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. You deserve to keep what you've built. You deserve a life that isn't constantly threatened by connection to me. Andrew, wait. He paused at the threshold, not trusting himself to turn around. What if there was another way? She asked. What if we could expose them before they expose us? How? I don't know yet. But Kevin found those emails. Maybe there's more evidence. Maybe we can turn their own tactics against them. Hope flickered in his chest, dangerous and fragile. That's a big maybe. Yes, it is. But maybe it's worth exploring before I surrender everything. He turned to face her then, and saw something in her eyes that made his pulse quicken. Not love. Not yet. But something equally precious. Determination. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that I'm tired of men making threats that force me to choose between my heart and my security. I'm thinking that maybe it's time to stop running from fights and start winning them. The fire in her eyes reminded him of the woman who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd transformed pain into power, who'd walked into his boardroom and claimed victory with elegant ruthlessness. What do you need from me? He asked. Everything you know about Joe Manning's operations, every detail about Paige's business practices, every connection you can think of that might give us leverage. And then we destroy them before they can destroy us. When do we start? He asked. We already have. As Andrew watched her move to her computer, he realized something that should have terrified him, but instead filled him with fierce pride. The woman he'd fallen in love with 5 years ago had been beautiful in her gentleness. The woman standing before him now was magnificent in her strength, and God help anyone who stood in her way. Chapter 6. They worked through the afternoon like generals planning a war, surrounded by financial documents, email printouts, and Kevin's growing collection of evidence. Kimberly's conference room had been transformed into a command center, with her sister Kathy arriving within an hour to provide legal counsel and strategic planning. The photos proved surveillance but not necessarily illegal activity, Kathy said, reviewing the blackmail letter for the 3rd time. However, if we can establish a pattern of harassment spanning 5 years, we might have grounds for a restraining order and criminal charges. That's assuming we can prove Joe and Paige ordered the surveillance, Kevin added, pulling up another email chain on his laptop. But I think I found something that connects them directly to the private investigators. Andrew watched Kimberly as she absorbed each piece of information, her mind working with the same sharp efficiency he remembered from their nights working late together. But now there was something harder in her focus, something that spoke of battles fought and won in boardrooms and negotiation tables. Show me, she said. Kevin turned his screen toward them, revealing a series of financial transfers between Paige's company and a private security firm called Sentinel Investigations. $50,000, paid in 3 installments over the past 6 months, Kevin explained. The timing corresponds exactly with the surveillance photos of both of you. Can we prove what the money was for? Kathy asked. Not directly, but look at this. Kevin opened another file. Sentinel Investigations has a very specific specialty, corporate espionage and what they euphemistically call reputation management. Their website is full of case studies about exposing corporate malfeasance and personal scandals. Kimberly leaned forward, studying the screen. They're professional blackmailers. Essentially, yes, and Jeff Paige has been their best client for the past 2 years. Andrew felt the pieces clicking into place like a combination lock opening. He's done this before, to other competitors. More than that, Kevin said, pulling up a news article from 18 months ago. Remember when Davidson Tech suddenly withdrew their bid for the Morrison contract? The one that would have made them a major player in our market? Andrew remembered. Davidson's withdrawal had seemed inexplicable. They'd had the superior proposal and the better pricing. Their sudden exit had left the field clear for Paige's company to swoop in with a last-minute bid. What happened to them? Kimberly asked. CEO caught in a scandal involving his assistant, photos of them at a conference hotel, implications of impropriety, complete destruction of his marriage and reputation. Sound familiar? The pattern was clear and devastating. Paige had been systematically eliminating competition through targeted character assassination, using personal relationships as weapons to destroy his rivals. We need more than patterns, Kathy said. We need concrete proof that Paige ordered the surveillance and the blackmail. I might be able to get that, Andrew said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Paige called this morning with an offer to buy my client database. He's clearly desperate to get his hands on those contracts before the acquisition goes through. If I could get him to admit his involvement— Too dangerous, Kimberly said immediately. If he suspects you're recording him, then we need to make sure he doesn't suspect. Andrew, no, you're not risking yourself for this. The protective instinct in her voice made his chest tighten. Even angry, even hurt, she still wanted to shield him from danger. It's the only way, he said. He trusts me to be desperate enough to take his deal. One conversation, properly recorded, and we have everything we need. Or you have a dead body and no evidence, Kathy said bluntly. These people have been playing this game for years. They know how to protect themselves. Not necessarily. Kevin was typing rapidly, pulling up another screen. Look at this. Paige's company is hemorrhaging money. Bad investments, failed contracts, mounting legal fees from all the litigation they've been pursuing. They're in worse financial shape than Huffman Industries was before the acquisition. Kimberly studied the financial reports with growing amazement. He's broke. Worse than broke, leveraged to the hilt and facing bankruptcy within 6 months unless he can land some major contracts. That's why he's so desperate to destroy you. He needs your client base to survive. And my patents, Andrew added. The automation software we developed could save his company millions in operational costs. The scope of Paige's desperation was becoming clear. This wasn't just about eliminating competition, it was about survival. A desperate man was a dangerous man, but also potentially a careless one. He'll take the meeting, Andrew said. He needs what I have too badly to refuse. Then we do this right, Kimberly said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to making life or death decisions. Recording equipment, backup devices, legal witnesses. If we're going to destroy him, we do it completely. Andrew felt a surge of fierce admiration for her tactical thinking. This was the woman who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd transformed pain into power, who was now preparing to wage war against men who'd thought they could destroy her. "There's one more thing," Kathy said quietly. "If we're going to expose all of this, we need to be prepared for the fallout. The photos of you two will likely become public during the legal proceedings. Your relationship, past and present, will be dissected in business publications and gossip columns." The reminder hit like cold water. Even if they won, even if they destroyed Paige and Manning completely, the cost would be Kimberly's privacy and potentially her reputation. "I've thought about that," Kimberly said, "and I've decided I'm tired of living my life in fear of what other people might think. If the truth about Andrew and me becomes public, so be it. I'd rather face that than spend the rest of my life running from threats." Andrew stared at her, amazed by her courage. "Kim, the only thing I regret about our relationship is how it ended," she continued, her eyes meeting his directly. "I'm not ashamed of having loved you. I'm not ashamed of still—" She paused, something vulnerable flickering across her features. "I'm not ashamed of my feelings, whatever they might be." The admission hung in the air like a gift. Not quite a declaration, but something close. Something that suggested the walls between them weren't as impermeable as they'd seemed. "So we do this," Andrew said. "We set up the meeting, record everything, and destroy them before they can destroy us." "Agreed," Kimberly said. "But we do it my way, thorough and completely legal. I won't give them any ammunition to use against us." They spent the next 2 hours planning every detail of the operation. Andrew would call Paige and arrange a dinner meeting for that evening, somewhere public but private enough for confidential conversation. Kevin would provide recording equipment disguised as a standard business presentation device. Kathy would position herself nearby as a legal witness, and Kimberly would coordinate from a remote location. "One condition," Kimberly said as they finalized the plans. "If anything goes wrong, if you feel threatened in any way, you abort the mission immediately. No recording is worth your safety." "Agreed." "I mean it, Andrew. These men have already shown they're willing to destroy lives for profit. Don't underestimate what they might do if they feel cornered." The concern in her voice made his heart clench. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite 5 years of hurt and anger, she still cared about his well-being. "I'll be careful," he promised. As the meeting broke up and Kevin and Kathy left to make their preparations, Andrew found himself alone with Kimberly in her office. The sun was setting over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded him of other evenings they'd spent working late together. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For trusting me with this, for letting me be part of the solution instead of just the problem." She was quiet for a moment, gathering papers from her desk with precise movements. "You were never just the problem, Andrew. You were the man I loved who made an impossible choice. I understand that now." "Do you forgive me?" The question escaped before he could stop it, raw and vulnerable in the quiet office. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'm trying to—" It wasn't the answer he'd hoped for, but it was more than he'd dared expect. Progress, not resolution. A door opening instead of slamming shut. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The meeting is confirmed for 8 p.m. Morton Steakhouse, private dining room. Come alone and come ready to make a deal. JP." Andrew showed Kimberly the message and saw her jaw tighten with determination. "He took the bait," she said. "Now we spring the trap." 3 hours later. Andrew adjusted the nearly invisible recording device Kevin had clipped to his tie, testing the connection one more time before entering Morton Steakhouse. The upscale restaurant was perfect for Paige's purposes, dimly lit, discreet, with private dining rooms that offered complete privacy for sensitive conversations. Testing, he said quietly, knowing that Kimberly and Kevin were listening from their surveillance van parked across the street. "We hear you perfectly," came Kimberly's voice through his barely visible earpiece. "Remember, we need him to explicitly admit to the surveillance and the blackmail. Don't push too hard. Let him incriminate himself." Got it. Andrew found Paige waiting in the reserved dining room, a bottle of expensive wine already open, and 2 glasses poured. Jeff Paige was a man who cultivated an image of success, perfectly tailored suit, designer watch, and a confident smile that had charmed investors and intimidated competitors for 2 decades. Andrew, good to see you, my friend. Please sit. Andrew settled into the leather chair across from Paige, accepting the offered wine with a nod of thanks. Appreciate you making time for this, Jeff. Of course, of course. I understand you're in something of a difficult position with the Lamar acquisition. These things can be complicated when personal relationships get involved. The opening was too perfect, too calculated. Paige had clearly rehearsed this conversation, confident that Andrew was desperate enough to take whatever deal was offered. Personal relationships? Andrew kept his voice carefully neutral. Come now, Andrew. We're both men of the world. I know about your history with Ms. Lamar. The photos from 5 years ago were quite illuminating. Andrew's blood went cold, but he forced himself to remain calm. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Of course you're not. Paige's smile was predatory. Just like I'm sure you have no idea why someone might have been taking pictures of your late-night meeting with her just 2 days ago. Someone's been taking pictures? Oh, Andrew, you really should be more careful about your privacy. Large windows, inadequate curtains, it's almost like you wanted to be photographed. The casual admission of surveillance was exactly what they needed, but Andrew felt sick at the implications. These men had been watching him, watching Kimberly, treating their private moments like entertainment. What do you want, Jeff? What I've always wanted. A fair marketplace. Ms. Lamar's acquisition of your company creates certain imbalances in our industry, unfair advantages that could be viewed as market manipulation. By whom? By anyone who sees those photographs, by business journalists who might wonder about the true nature of your relationship, by competitors who might question whether Ms. Lamar's success is based on merit or on more personal considerations. The threat was clear now, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who'd played this game many times before. You're talking about blackmail, Andrew said. I'm talking about market correction. I'm offering you a way to extract maximum value from your assets while avoiding potential embarrassment for both you and Ms. Lamar. In exchange for? Your client database, your patent portfolio, and your complete withdrawal from any ongoing relationship with Lamar Industries, personal or professional. Andrew leaned back in his chair, letting silence stretch between them. In his earpiece, he could hear Kimberly's sharp intake of breath at Paige's demands. That's quite a comprehensive request, Andrew said finally. I'm quite a comprehensive person. I believe in thoroughness, Andrew. When I identify a problem, I solve it completely. Like you solved the Davidson tech problem? Paige's eyes sharpened, and Andrew realized he'd pushed too hard. The casual mention of Davidson had been a mistake. I'm not sure what you mean. Come on, Jeff. We both know what happened to Davidson. The CEO caught in a compromising position, his reputation was destroyed, and his company was forced to withdraw from the market. Quite convenient for your expansion plans. Are you suggesting I had something to do with Davidson's misfortunes? I'm suggesting you have a pattern of eliminating competition through character assassination, and I'm suggesting that's exactly what you're trying to do to Kimberly. Paige set down his wine glass, his mask of friendly concern finally slipping away. What I'm trying to do, Andrew, is save you from making the same mistake you made 5 years ago. You destroyed your relationship with Ms. Lamar once to protect her from scandal. Are you really prepared to let history repeat itself? Maybe I'm prepared to fight this time. Fight with what? You have no company, no resources, no leverage. Ms. Lamar has everything to lose and nothing to gain from associating with you. Those photographs will destroy her reputation just as thoroughly as they destroyed yours 5 years ago. Unless we expose you first. The words slipped out before Andrew could stop them, and he saw Paige's eyes narrow with dangerous calculation. Expose me for what? For systematically destroying your competitors through blackmail and character assassination. For using private investigators to gather compromising information. for conspiracy to commit fraud and market manipulation. Page laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's quite an accusation. I hope you have evidence to support such claims. I have enough. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you have nothing but theories and desperation, and Ms. Lamar has 48 hours to make a decision that will determine whether her reputation survives or dies. Andrew felt the conversation slipping away from him. Page was too experienced, too careful with his words. They needed a confession, not veiled threats and implications. What if I could convince her to withdraw from the acquisition? Andrew asked, changing tactics. What if she agreed to your terms voluntarily? That would be optimal, but I'm afraid I'd need certain guarantees that the withdrawal was permanent. Such as? Complete documentation of your relationship, detailed financial records of the acquisition, signed statements acknowledging that personal considerations influenced the business decision. Andrew's stomach turned. Page wasn't just demanding surrender, he was demanding complete humiliation, evidence that could be used to destroy both their reputations permanently. You want us to confess to things we didn't do. I want you to acknowledge realities that already exist. Your relationship influenced the acquisition. Ms. Lamar's feelings for you compromised her business judgment. The deal was tainted from the beginning. And if we refuse, then tomorrow morning, every major business publication in the country will receive a very detailed package of photographs and documentation. Ms. Lamar's company will face immediate SEC investigation for fraudulent business practices. Her clients will flee to avoid association with scandal. Her reputation will be destroyed so completely that she'll never work in this industry again. The threat was delivered calmly, and Andrew realized he was looking at a man who destroyed lives without a moment's hesitation. You son of a bitch! I'm a businessman, Andrew. I solve problems efficiently and permanently. Ms. Lamar is a problem. You are a problem. Tomorrow, if you don't accept my terms, neither of you will be problems anymore. Andrew stood abruptly, fury overriding caution. You think you can just destroy people's lives for profit? I think I can do whatever is necessary to protect my interests, just as you thought you could do whatever was necessary to protect Ms. Lamar 5 years ago. The only difference is that I'm better at it than you were. We'll see about that. Andrew moved toward the door, but Page's voice stopped him. Andrew, one more thing. He turned back reluctantly. If you're thinking about doing something foolish, like trying to record this conversation or gather evidence against me, I should remind you that I have resources you can't imagine. People who are very good at making problems disappear permanently. Ms. Lamar is a brilliant woman who's built something beautiful. It would be a shame if something happened to her because you couldn't let go of the past. The threat against Kimberly sent ice through Andrew's veins. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about survival. Stay away from her. That's entirely up to you. Make the right choice, and she lives happily ever after in whatever life she builds after leaving this industry. Make the wrong choice. Page shrugged eloquently. Andrew left the restaurant feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. In his earpiece, Kimberly's voice was sharp with concern. Andrew? Andrew, are you okay? I'm fine, he said quietly, walking toward the surveillance van. Did you get everything? Every word. That bastard just confessed to everything. The surveillance, the blackmail, the threats. We have him. But as Andrew climbed into the van and saw the fierce determination in Kimberly's eyes, he realized they'd won a battle but might have started a war. Page's final threat echoed in his mind, making problems disappear permanently. He threatened you directly, Andrew said. This isn't just about business anymore. I know. Her voice was steady, but he could see the fear she was trying to hide. Which means we need to move fast. If we're going to destroy him, we need to do it before he has a chance to make good on his threats. Kim, maybe you should what? Run? Hide? Let him win because I'm afraid? Should protect yourself. This man is dangerous. So am I. Her smile was sharp as a blade. He made one crucial mistake, Andrew. He underestimated what I'm willing to do to protect what I've built, what we've built. The possessive pronoun hit him like electricity. Not what she'd built alone, but what they'd built together. Despite everything, despite 5 years of separation and pain, she was including him in her future. "What's the plan?" he asked. "We go to the FBI tonight. Financial fraud, conspiracy, criminal threats. They'll have enough to arrest him by morning. And then—" Her eyes met his, dark with promise. "Then we rebuild. Together." The word hung between them like a bridge across 5 years of regret. Not forgiveness, not quite, but something more precious. Possibility. As they drove through the Seattle night, surrounded by evidence of corruption and conspiracy, Andrew realized that sometimes the best thing that could happen to two broken people was a common enemy. Sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome the past, but sometimes love combined with shared purpose, mutual respect, and the determination to fight together could create something stronger than either emotion alone. Tomorrow, they would destroy Jeff Page. Tonight, they would finally figure out what came next for Andrew Huffman and Kimberly Lamar. The thought terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Chapter 7. The FBI field office buzzed with activity even at 10 p.m. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to Kimberly's former name despite the coincidence, reviewed their evidence with the thoroughness of someone who'd built a career on bringing down white-collar criminals. "This is good," she said, studying the financial records Kevin had compiled. "Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, criminal surveillance. We can get warrants tonight and have Page and Manning in custody by morning." "What about the threats?" Kimberly asked. "He specifically threatened physical harm." "Criminal intimidation, conspiracy to commit assault. We'll add those to the charges." Agent Chen looked up from the files. "I have to ask, are you both prepared for this to become very public very quickly? Once we arrest Page, this story will be everywhere. Your relationship, the photographs, all of it." Andrew felt Kimberly tense beside him, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "We're prepared." "Good. Because men like Page don't go down quietly. Expect character assassination, leaked stories, attempts to discredit your testimony. His lawyers will try to make this about your relationship rather than his crimes." "Let them try," Kimberly said, her tone carrying the confidence of someone who'd survived worse battles. "The evidence speaks for itself." Agent Chen smiled grimly. "Yes, it does. We'll be in touch within 24 hours. In the meantime, I'd suggest staying together and being careful. Cornered animals are dangerous." An hour later, Andrew and Kimberly sat in his penthouse, the city lights sprawling below them like scattered diamonds. The exhaustion was finally hitting both of them, the adrenaline of the investigation, the tension of the dinner recording, the weight of decisions that would reshape their lives. "It's over," Kimberly said, but her voice held no satisfaction. "After tomorrow, Page and Manning will be finished." "Justice," Andrew said. "Justice." She nodded, then looked at him with something vulnerable in her expression. "So what happens now?" The question hung between them like a bridge they weren't sure they were ready to cross. 5 years of hurt and separation couldn't be erased by shared enemies and common purpose. But something had shifted between them during their hours of planning and plotting, something that felt like the foundation for whatever came next. "I don't know," Andrew said honestly. "What do you want to happen?" "I want ... She stopped, struggling with words that had been locked away for years. "I want to stop being afraid. I want to stop letting the past control my decisions. I want to find out if what we had can become something different, something stronger. And if it can't, then at least we'll know. At least we'll have tried." Andrew moved closer on the couch, close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to catch the subtle scent that was uniquely hers. "I never stopped loving you," he said quietly. 5 years, and I never stopped wanting you, needing you, dreaming about what we could have been." "I know." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I felt the same way, and I hated myself for it. I built my entire identity around being strong enough to survive without you. But the truth is, I never really learned how. Maybe you weren't supposed to survive without me. Maybe we were supposed to find our way back to each other." "Maybe," Or maybe we're just two broken people who don't know how to be alone. The brutal honesty should have hurt, but instead, Andrew found it liberating. No pretense, no careful diplomacy, just truth laid bare between them. "Does it matter?" he asked. "Whether we're together because we're whole or because we're broken? Whether it's love or need or just the inability to let go? I don't know. Should it matter? All I know is that I want to find out. I want to discover what Andrew and Kimberly look like when they're not running from each other or from threats or from the past." She studied his face as if memorizing it, and he could see her weighing possibilities, calculating risks, trying to decide whether to trust him with her heart again. "The photos will be public," she said finally. "Our relationship will be dissected in business magazines and gossip columns. Are you prepared for that? Are you? I'm tired of living my life based on what other people might think. If loving you costs me some clients or some respect in certain circles, then those weren't relationships worth preserving anyway." The admission took his breath away, not just because of what she was saying, but because of the courage it required to say it. "I love you," he said, the words escaping like a confession. "Not the memory of you, not the idea of you. You, the woman who built an empire from nothing, the woman who just spent 12 hours planning the destruction of men who thought they could intimidate her. The woman who's brave enough to risk everything for the possibility of something real." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I love you too. I've loved you through 5 years of anger and hurt and pride. I've loved you despite every logical reason not to. I've loved you even when I convinced myself I hated you." The distance between them evaporated, as if it had never existed. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away tears that tasted like forgiveness and possibility. "Kim," he whispered against her lips, "don't let me go this time," she breathed. "Whatever happens, whatever challenges we face, don't let me go. Never. Never again." The kiss was everything their first kiss had been, and everything the intervening years had taught them it could become. Desperation and tenderness, passion and promise, the collision of two people who'd finally stopped running from what they'd always known was inevitable. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she responded with equal hunger. 5 years of suppressed desire blazing between them like wildfire. Her fingers worked at the buttons of his shirt with desperate efficiency, and he realized that somewhere between planning warfare and choosing truth, they'd crossed a line from which there would be no retreat. "Are you sure?" he asked, even as his hands found the zipper of her dress. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The silk fell away like water, revealing skin he'd dreamed about for 5 years. She was more beautiful than his memories, more real than his fantasies, and when she reached for him with hands that trembled only slightly, he felt something inside his chest crack open and spill light. They moved together with the kind of desperate grace that comes from years of wanting and waiting, bodies relearning the geography of desire, hearts remembering how to trust completely. Every touch was a question answered, every kiss a promise made, every whispered endearment a bridge built between past pain and future possibility. When she arched beneath him, his name on her lips like a prayer, Andrew understood that this wasn't just physical connection. It was emotional resurrection. They were creating something new from the ashes of what they had lost, something stronger for having been tested by separation and refined by suffering. "I missed you," she gasped against his throat. "God, I missed this, missed us." "We're here now," he said, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "We're here, and we're not going anywhere." They made love like people drowning and being saved simultaneously, with an intensity that comes from recognizing second chances and refusing to waste them. Her hands mapped the changes 5 years had made to his body, while his mouth relearned the sounds of her pleasure, and when they finally moved together in that ancient rhythm, it felt like coming home and discovering new territory all at once. Afterward, they lay tangled in his sheets, her head on his chest, their breathing slowly returning to normal. The city glittered beyond the windows, but Andrew's entire universe had contracted to the woman in his arms in the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his skin. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow we watch Page and Manning get arrested. Tomorrow we deal with media attention and legal proceedings and all the practical details of justice. And after that? After that we build something new. Your company, my expertise, our combined resources and connections. We create something that's stronger than what either of us had separately." "Business partnership?" "Among other things." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "If you're interested in those other things." She lifted her head to look at him, and her smile was radiant. "I'm very interested in those other things." "Good. Because I plan to spend a considerable amount of time convincing you that those other things are the best decision you'll ever make." "Considerable time?" "The rest of my life, if you'll let me." The proposal wasn't elegant or planned, but it was honest, and he saw her breath catch as she processed what he was offering. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to build a life with me. Marriage, partnership, whatever form that takes, I want all of it. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to face whatever challenges come our way together instead of apart. Even if those challenges include congressional hearings and SEC investigations and business magazines dissecting our every decision. Especially then. Because if the last 2 days have taught me anything, it's that we're unstoppable when we work together." She was quiet for a long moment, and he could feel her thinking, weighing the enormity of what he was asking. Not just forgiveness, but faith. Not just love, but trust in a future they'd have to build together despite all the forces that would try to tear them apart. "Yes," she said finally, simply. "Yes. Yes to all of it. The partnership, the marriage, the life we're going to build. Yes to taking risks and facing challenges and refusing to let anyone else determine our fate. Yes to us." The relief that flooded through him was so intense it was almost painful. He'd spent 5 years believing he'd lost her forever, and now she was choosing him again, choosing them, choosing the possibility of something beautiful despite everything that had tried to destroy it. "I love you, Kimberly Lamar," he said, rolling her beneath him so he could see her face in the moonlight. "I love you too, Andrew Huffman, and I can't wait to see what we build together." When they made love again, it was with the slow, thorough intensity of people who finally had all the time in the world. No more secrets, no more separation, no more walls between them. Just two people who'd found their way back to each other against impossible odds. As dawn broke over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Andrew realized that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't money or influence or the ability to destroy enemies. Sometimes it was simply the courage to love someone completely, trust them absolutely, and build something beautiful together from whatever materials life provided. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to prove that what they'd rebuilt was stronger than anything that had tried to tear them apart. But tonight was theirs, and it was perfect. 1 week later. The headline in the Seattle Business Journal read, "Tech executives arrested in multi-million-dollar extortion scheme." Below it, a smaller headline added, "Huffman-Lamar merger proceeds despite criminal investigation." Andrew read the article over coffee in Kimberly's, their, kitchen, still amazed by how quickly their lives had transformed. Page and Manning had been arrested without incident, their assets frozen pending investigation. The evidence Kevin had compiled proved even more damaging than expected, revealing a web of corruption that stretched back nearly a decade. "Any regrets?" Kimberly asked, settling beside him with her own cup of coffee and the morning stack of business publications. "About which part? Destroying our enemies, merging our companies, or asking you to marry me?" "All of it." Andrew considered the question seriously. Their engagement had made front-page news in 3 different business magazines. His former company was now officially part of Lamar Industries. His penthouse had become their shared home. Everything familiar had been transformed, rebuilt, made new. "No regrets," he said finally. "You?" "Only one." His heart skipped a beat. "What?" I regret that it took us 5 years to figure out that we're better together than apart." Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by a bone-deep contentment he'd forgotten was possible. "We'll make up for lost time," he promised. "I'm counting on it." She leaned over to kiss him, tasting like coffee and morning sunshine and infinite possibility. "Speaking of which, Kathy needs us at the office in an hour. We have 3 new acquisition offers to review and a partnership proposal from Davidson Tech." "Davidson wants to partner with us?" "Apparently, our reputation for destroying corrupt competitors has made us very popular with companies that value ethical business practices." Andrew laughed, pulling her closer. "We've become the good guys. We've become partners in every sense of the word. I like the sound of that." "Good, because you're stuck with me now." "Promise?" "Promise." As they finished their coffee and prepared for another day of building their empire together, Andrew realized that the greatest victory hadn't been destroying Page and Manning or merging their companies or even winning back the woman he loved. The greatest victory was discovering that love, real, tested, chosen love, could transform people from adversaries into allies, from broken individuals into an unstoppable force. And they were just getting started. 5 months later. The wedding was small, intimate, held in the penthouse garden with Seattle's skyline as their witness. Kimberly wore ivory silk that caught the afternoon light, her smile radiant as she spoke vows that promised partnership, trust, and the courage to face whatever came next together. Andrew's voice was steady as he promised to choose them every day, to trust her strength, to build something beautiful from whatever challenges life presented. When they kissed as husband and wife, the applause from their small gathering of family and friends seemed to echo across the entire city. "Mrs. Huffman Lamar," he whispered against her lips. "Mr. Huffman Lamar," she corrected with a grin. "We're partners now, equal billing." The hyphenated name had been her idea, a symbol that they were creating something new together, rather than one person absorbing into the other's identity. Huffman Lamar Industries was thriving under their joint leadership, their reputation for integrity and excellence attracting clients who valued ethical business practices. The media attention had been intense but ultimately positive. Their story, the secretary who became a CEO, the billionaire who lost everything and found something better, the love that survived betrayal and emerged stronger, had captured public imagination. Business magazines wrote case studies about their turnaround strategies. Leadership conferences invited them to speak about partnership and resilience. But the most satisfying victory had been watching Jeff Page and Joe Manning face justice. Page received 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and extortion. Manning got 12 years for embezzlement and corporate sabotage. Their companies collapsed within weeks of their arrests, their assets distributed among the victims of their schemes. "Any regrets?" Kimberly asked during their first dance, her body fitting perfectly against his as they swayed to the soft music. "About marrying the most brilliant, beautiful, dangerous woman in Seattle? Not a chance." "Dangerous? You destroyed 2 companies and rebuilt an empire. You're absolutely terrifying, and I love every second of it." Her laugh was pure joy, the sound Andrew had dreamed about during 5 years of emptiness. "Good thing you're not intimidated by powerful women. Good thing you're not intimidated by reformed failures." "Reformed?" She pulled back to look at him with mock seriousness. "You were never a failure, Andrew. You were just a man who made one terrible decision and spent 5 years learning from it. And you were never just a secretary. You were always destined for this. Maybe, or maybe we were both exactly who we needed to be when we needed to be it. Maybe the pain and separation and rebuilding were necessary to create what we have now." Andrew considered that as they continued dancing, surrounded by the people who'd supported them through the worst and best moments of their lives. Kevin, now chief technology officer of their merged company, dancing with his wife. Kathy, Kimberly's fierce protector and legal counsel, laughing with one of Andrew's former board members who'd remained loyal throughout the crisis. Agent Chen, who'd become a friend during the long months of legal proceedings, raising a glass in their direction. "Maybe you're right," he said finally. Maybe we needed to lose each other to learn how to choose each other. I know I'm right. The woman who fell in love with you 5 years ago was naive enough to think love was enough. The woman who married you today knows that love is just the beginning, that real partnership requires trust, respect, communication, and the willingness to fight for each other every single day. And are you willing to fight for us every day? For the rest of my life. The conviction in her voice made his chest tight with emotion. This wasn't the desperate passion of young love or the grateful relief of second chances. This was the solid, unshakable foundation of two people who'd chosen each other with full knowledge of the costs and complications. I love you, Mrs. Huffman Lamar. I love you too, Mr. Huffman Lamar, now and always. As the sun set over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Andrew realized that their story had become something larger than just personal redemption. It had become proof that love, real, tested, chosen love, could overcome any obstacle when combined with courage, honesty, and the determination to build something beautiful together. And so, we reach the end of Andrew and Kimberly's journey, a story that began with heartbreak and betrayal, but transformed into something magnificent through the power of truth, forgiveness, and the courage to love completely. Their path wasn't easy. It required Andrew to confront his own cowardice and learn to trust Kimberly's strength rather than trying to protect her from it. It demanded that Kimberly risk the security she'd built to embrace the vulnerability that true partnership requires. Both had to choose love over fear, trust over safety, and the uncertain promise of building something together over the familiar pain of being apart. But perhaps that's what real love requires, not the absence of fear, but the decision to act with courage despite that fear, not the guarantee of a perfect future, but the commitment to face whatever comes together. Andrew learned that protecting someone isn't the same as loving them, that real love means trusting your partner to make their own choices, even when those choices feel dangerous. Kimberly discovered that strength isn't about needing no one. It's about choosing someone worthy of your trust and building something together that's greater than what either could create alone. Their enemies thought they could use love as a weapon. That connection was vulnerability to be exploited. But Andrew and Kimberly proved that love, honest, respectful, chosen love, is actually the most powerful force in the universe. It can transform enemies into allies, turn pain into wisdom, and create something beautiful from the most broken materials. They discovered that the greatest power isn't control over others. It's the courage to be vulnerable with someone who sees your true worth. Have you ever found that kind of transformative love? The kind that challenges you to be better while accepting exactly who you are? The kind that survives mistakes and emerges stronger? Or are you still waiting for someone brave enough to fight for your heart? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your stories of second chances, of love that conquered fear, of partnerships that made you both stronger. Your courage in sharing might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more passionate journeys of the heart. Tomorrow, we'll explore another tale of love, finding a way against impossible odds, because every heart deserves its happy ending and every love story deserves to be told. Thank you for joining Andrew and Kimberly on their journey from heartbreak to healing, from separation to partnership, from broken dreams to beautiful reality. Remember, your own love story might be just beginning, and the best chapters are often the ones that follow the greatest challenges.